Good morning, everyone. I'm Christopher Maternowski, a senior fellow with the Policy Insights Forum, also known as the Pith. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to the Policy Insights Forum Strategic Roundtable Series. Today's event is entitled Advancing the New Space Frontier, Opportunities for Defense and Commercial Organizations. To begin, I'd like to say a bit about the Pith and its mission. The Pith is a nonpartisan Canadian non-governmental organization that helps to improve public policy and decision-making through independent research, analysis, and engagement. Our goal at the Pith is to facilitate meaningful Canadian public policy discussions regarding national defense, international relations, emergent disruptive technologies, climate change, and the economy. Today's event is brought to you by Samuel Associates. Samuel Associates is a trusted advisor to many influential businesses and leaders. It works with clients in the aerospace, defense, national security, and cyberspace industries, providing market advisory services and governmental relations. We hope that you enjoyed today's session and invite you to participate. Now, please allow me to introduce Fatima Atik, Executive Director at the Pith, who will moderate today's discussion. Fatima?
Thank you, Christopher. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the PIF's chairperson, Goran Samuel Sepik, and the executive committee, I would like to welcome you all this morning and thank you for your time. Space has become and will continue to be a critical domain, providing both unimaginable economic and scientific opportunities for the private sector and unparalleled vantage point for national security and defense. But space also presents significant risks to both commercial and defense players. As innovation by commercial actors continues to accelerate, and as foreign entities continue to challenge international norms, closer collaboration between government and commercial entities has never been so vital. How then should commercial and government entities collaborate in space? That's the simple question we would like to address today. To discuss this question, we're fortunate to have with us the Honorable Brian Gallant, Chief Executive Officer of Space Canada, Mr. Steve Hampton, Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs at Telesat, Mr. Ryan McKenney, Vice President and General Manager at Satellogic North America, and Mr. Patrick Terra, President of Advanced Technologies at Calian. Gentlemen, thank you all for your time this morning. May I please ask you to take a few moments to tell us more about your organizations before we could go ahead and start our discussion. Go ahead, Brian, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Fatima. Very much appreciated invitation to be here with these fantastic people on this important subject. So Brian Gallant, as you mentioned, I'm the CEO of a newly formed organization. We're just over 6 months old, which is called Space Canada. We represent Canada's space sector, Canadian space innovators, and the ecosystem as well. And we're looking to promote the Canadian space sector domestically and abroad, advocate for it as well. We want to make sure that we shape the conversation around the space sector and, of course, things that are important to the industry as well. We want to raise awareness and educate Canadians as to the importance of space on their everyday lives, the role space can play in helping tackle societal and planetary challenges, as well as the economic opportunities and going right to the granular of the career opportunities for Canadians and people around the world with regards to space. And we want to enhance collaboration. We want to help key stakeholders get together and work together to advance the Canadian space sector and the global space sector. And of course, we want to also enhance collaboration within the industry itself. So yet another reason why I'm so happy to be here with my esteemed colleagues on this panel that represent important stakeholders in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Brian. Patrick?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm Patrick Terra, President of Calian's Advanced Technologies, where we believe we can help the world innovate, communicate, learn, lead healthy lives, and stay safe. Calian Advanced Technologies business unit covers a broad set of technologies capabilities in space, though our focus is on the ground systems and ground system technologies. This ranges from antennas of all types and sizes for satellite communications, space exploration, surveillance, and GNS location and timing, over to digital digitization of the baseband, digital baseband architectures such as RF over IP, which assists in virtualization of the ground networks, and software-defined orchestration, as well as satellite operations, and of course full RF ground systems and gateways. We work in commercial, government, and defense sectors.
Great, thank you. Ryan?
Yes, thank you very much. Ryan McKinney, Vice President, General Manager for Satellogic North America. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of Satellogic Inc., which is not based in the US. So we formed here in North America with our mission to be supporting Canadian and US government agencies along with NATO. So we support all aspects of the government, including civilian agencies along with defense and intel. We currently have 26 sub-meter resolution satellites in orbit today, and that number continues to grow. And we provide that data coming off of our satellites to different government agencies, solving a whole range of different use cases. We also work very closely with the system integrators. There's supporting government initiatives to make sure that, again, that collaboration that was just mentioned can actually occur with an Earth observation data set like ours.
Thank you. Stephen?
Perfect. Thanks, Fatima, Christopher, and the whole Public Insights team for setting this up and having us here today. My name is Stephen Hampton. I'm head of public policy for Telesat. Telesat is one of the largest satellite operators in the world. We are currently undertaking our most ambitious project over our 50-year history, which is a multi-billion-dollar low Earth orbit satellite constellation that's going to bring fiber-like connectivity and 5G to every square inch of the world, whether you're at sea, in the air, or on the ground. This topic's really, really important. Commercial space is disrupting sectors around the world, and really looking forward to having the conversation.
Great, thank you so much. It's just wonderful to hear the variety of commercial practices, right? When we hear space, we tend to think of one thing, but of course there's plenty of activity happening, and everyone has a role to play, and hence the question on collaboration. We'll go ahead and get started. So I think one of the first questions that we've shared was with regards to the war in Ukraine. Of course, the war in Ukraine demonstrated that systems used by commercial space actors are of great application. Of course, they provided imagery of troop movements that was conducive to us or to allies acting and taking notice of what is happening in the area. However, now a rising concern is how do these space actors remain safe because they've exposed their own vulnerability. So I'll go ahead and start this question with you, Ryan. So how can commercial space players continue to offer real-time imagery and communication services while mitigating risks to their assets and their customers?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, and it's certainly something that we need to make sure everybody's very clear on. One thing I want to make sure we point out is the term real time. And I think sometimes this is a little bit of a misnomer of what actually is possible from space and how people interact with data from space. So in theory, most commercial data sets are not what you would consider real time. It's not the same as sitting there and watching something on television. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen. The data you have to task a satellite, you have to acquire the data, you have to pull the data down, you have to process the data, and then get it into a format where people are allowed to, then combine it with other things and then pull the insight out, right? So the term real time, the term that I like is more rate of collection because it takes a little bit more time to get it through, and it removes a little bit of that thought process. But the truth is the data is very good at telling you what's happening in specific areas. And you can derive things from that and be able to track movements and understand where that is. I think we have an obligation as an industry to really make sure we're doing everything we can both to secure the data integrity as well as making sure we know who our customers are and what they're doing with the data. At Satellogic, along with many of our other commercial data partners, there's a fairly extensive, we call it KYC, or know your customer vetting process that you go through to make sure you are working with partners in a way that you think you're supposed to be working with them. But you do have to be careful of that, and we certainly take that very seriously. And I think this being the first major conflict where we've been able to see space-based data from commercial operators used in a whole host of different ways, it just expresses how important it is for us to make sure we know who we're working with.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, and obviously very insightful. Just the elaboration on what real time actually means, and of course integrity. I think those are valid points and very insightful indeed. And Stephen, from a communication perspective, how does that question play out to you?
Thanks, Fatima. Yeah, I would kind of take a big step back, and yes, this the most recent invasion of Ukraine is a good example of this. But commercial space has been working with government for a long time. Telesat ourselves, we do lots of work with Canadian government and other governments around the world. And I think it really goes to something Ryan touched on, just about the integrity of your own networks and infrastructure. And at Telesat, we have the most stringent cybersecurity and other types of security at our physical assets from the time that we design the satellite all the way until it's launched and then while in service. And I think that's a good opportunity for the private sector to work with government on setting standards, on pushing the boundaries of what technology can do from a security perspective, but also information sharing. We work very closely with governments on information sharing and ensuring that we have very strong integrity within our networks. So I would say this, it's not necessarily a new thing that private space companies need to protect their networks, and this is just one recent example.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I think, Brian, you really want to address specifically how the invasion of Ukraine, the pandemic, climate change influenced the need for more focus on space by Canada to strengthen its defense efforts. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, thanks, Fatima. It's unfortunate to speak to this because you're listing off three global challenges that are very serious and certainly putting a strain on people around the world, Canadians, and our system. So obviously very well said by Ryan and Stephen with regards to the importance that space has been playing with the efforts of Canada, our allies, to have the best intel data and images that they're collecting from space to be able to inform efforts in Ukraine and provide what is vital information to Ukrainian officials. The invasion of Ukraine is also a bit of a nudge for Canada to remind itself that it needs to invest to protect its borders and sovereignty. And through space, Canada can enhance its national security and better protect its sovereignty by more effectively monitoring the North and our borders. So it's an unfortunate kind of reminder. It's an unfortunate nudge, but it is one that we should be thinking about. The pandemic, I think I'm saying I'm not giving any information. Everybody is very well aware that the pandemic put a lot of inequalities on display, including the inequality of the digital divide that we see in Canada and around the world. So it definitely was yet another reminder that we need to enhance high-speed connectivity in remote, rural, and Indigenous communities. And of course, space is going to play a pivotal role in doing that. So yet another reason why this global challenge is pointing us towards making space more of a priority. And then with regards to climate change, there's a few layers. First off, the efforts to combat climate change, the efforts to mitigate climate change. We need space to do that as effectively as possible. The World Meteorological Organization lists that over 50% of the variables that we need to be monitoring to better understand what's happening with climate change and fight it and mitigate it, we're going to collect that, we're going to get that from space. Then, of course, a consequence of climate change that will be felt, here in Canada, but in other parts of the world as well, is the fact that we're going to see some northern waterways start to become a little more navigable. So that certainly has some considerations, logistical, but also with regards to defense. So a very important consequence of climate change. And then the one other piece I would put for climate change is the idea that, of course, with more frequent and severe weather events, which we're just on the tail of with Hurricane Fiona, as well with forest fires and droughts and other very difficult circumstances, this will create a greater demand for Canadian Armed Forces to provide domestic responses. This will provide for a need to have better and enhanced telecommunications to help our armed forces be able to respond to these events. So yet another reason as to why we're going to need to enhance efforts in space to be able to properly respond to those types of very unfortunate situations, which we just saw over the last few days here in Atlantic Canada, where I'm from, and of course with other weather events across the globe.
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you. Thanks, Brian. Those are obviously very insightful points. And we when you mentioned obviously climate change and the pandemic, those are global events, and we're realizing that commercial entities and governments need to work collaboratively globally. For example, NATO has launched an innovative fund where it will invest 1 billion euros to early stage startup developments, again, to address and to try to harness dual use emerging technologies. So the fund will complement NATO's Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic, or DIANA, blending emerging civil technology and military requirements to support transnational security. So I think just to kind of continue what you're talking about from a global perspective, DIANA, of course, with this fund is a fund that countries of the alliance are contributing to. It will provide tremendous opportunities to North American space sector. So how do you all see the role that governments would play to position startups and, of course, your own organizations to go ahead and acquire these funds and advance emerging technologies? I could start with you, Patrick, if you would like.
Sure thing. That's a really interesting question, and it's a big challenge for government, I think, when they want to create and vector a large amount of money like this into the best possible way. You know, I find I have to compartmentalize my thinking a little bit between helping startups and advancing technology, right? And I don't find the two always, you know, it has to be one to do the other.
Right.
I think there is a collaborative sense and a collaborative nature that we all can play. You know, if you look at the model, I'm not saying it's perfect, but if you look at the model the European Space Agency uses to fund collaboration and fund programs, they put out specific challenges to the industry, and they say, how can you meet that? Who's funding that? How do we work together to solve that problem, and then go after it once the funding is allocated to those groups, honor it and publish it, and everybody in the consortium gets a benefit from it. And I really think something like that is going to be, I think, the best way forward. You know, how you evaluate, who's on the evaluation committee, that's an interesting challenge. But at least if you kind of vector the problem space so that we're really working on what the use cases that the governments want and what we need, I think is one of the biggest challenges, one of the ways we need to focus it. Not so much on the startup angle. That's good. It's important.
Right.
On that collaboration.
No, that's definitely a great point. Ryan, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept, and I think it's something that all startups have to really think about, because one of the things startups sometimes can get into a habit of doing is really thinking about looking at a problem and building a product before they actually know what they're trying to solve, right? They go looking for the problem. So when a startup gets the opportunity to, you know, European Space Agency is a great idea, a great way of looking at this. The more collaboration there is between the commercial environment, the startup world, and even large businesses that can innovate as well, and that collaboration with government and understand what the use cases are and what they're trying to solve, the better everybody is at making sure they solve that problem. The other component to that, though, and this is certainly from a startup angle, you know, startups typically aren't just looking to solve a government issue. They typically want to solve a market issue that is much, much bigger. And so I think when you can combine a government need with a larger market requirement, and use that collaboration and pull everybody in together, it typically works out for the best.
Fatima, maybe I'll just jump in there. I completely agree with what Patrick and Brian said. And I think if we look at kind of what Brian touched on, space is booming largely because there's a whole bunch of solutions that are problems emerging where the solution is now in space, where it wasn't 5, 10, 15 years ago. So the opportunities are growing exponentially. And to Ryan's point, oftentimes it is dual use technologies in space. There's government applications, but there's also private sector commercial applications or research, etc. I think the ESA model is an interesting one from an R&D standpoint. I think the DARPA model, truthfully, is also a very useful one where there's great opportunities to help kind of emerging technologies. And within that, I include startups, SMEs, but also companies that are reinventing themselves. But I think the other big component here where governments can play a big role is from an anchor customer perspective. There's lots that we can do to help commercial companies in the R&D phase. But if we really want to help commercialize companies where they're growing, not just in Canada, but around the world, having a government as an anchor customer is really, really important. The other aspect, and kind of just to bring it all together, is something Brian is spending a lot of time on right now, is with the National Space Council. And I think that's a really, really important tool that we're seeing leveraged in the US, similar models in the UK, EU, etc., where government is looking at problems and they're looking at space and how can we, as a whole of government, try and solve this and leverage what we have here in Canada.
Yeah, no, thanks, Steve. That's definitely insightful. And of course, I love the DARPA and of course the European Space Agency. These are all models that Diana is looking to emulate. So it's great that you guys are kind of already seeing that happening. Another question, just specifically to your organizations, what dual use technology do you currently provide or envision to provide with regards to future space challenges? Patrick?
Okay, sure. It's interesting when we talk about dual use technologies. It's not always dual use until it becomes dual use. Like, you're not always aware that you're working on a dual use technology until the use cases become apparent. We've done this lots in our past where we've developed, like on the GNSS technology side, you're working on a commercial project, you're singly focused on that, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's all these kind of maybe great use cases for defense. There are also nefarious use cases in defense, and so you suddenly have to shift your whole focus and make sure you're vetting your customers again to make sure that this doesn't end up in the wrong hands or that it's properly classified, and you got to work with government on that. And and other types of technology that we do, it's really it works both ways. Like our ground systems technology, there's nothing in there that makes it one way or the other. It's just what's transported over it that makes it sort of dual use. I think one of the key challenges in the dual use environment, and Ryan kind of alluded to it early on, is vetting your customer base. Is people lie, and so how do you know when you've got this great customer on the hook that it's not going to the wrong place at the end of the day because they double, triple, quadruple blind move that product around. So I think being able to get agile government support on some of that vetting is going to be a key part of enabling dual use technology properly.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. That's again, I think the theme of client trust is definitely recurring in the industry. And one of the things that we're seeing, especially in the US, is actual consultation by American space industry leaders that highlight that just because of that mistrust, if you will, national security goals and commercial goals sometimes may conflict or appear to conflict. So have you experienced such conflict? And I'll go with Ryan first, just because he's in the US and that's where the study comes out of. So if you could speak to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think we all have had a conflict of some sort in that space. The truth of the matter is, this type of data, the data that we provide, multispectral, high resolution imagery, was sort of built for defense and intel, right? That's where it started. So I think you have to be realistic that that is a big part of the market. And if you're going to address this market, you need to understand what that means. Now, having said that, I think it's incumbent upon data providers like us, where we build licensing structures that make the data flexible in use. Because, as mentioned before, I believe Stephen mentioned it, there's a lot of different commercial uses for this type of data, way beyond the use cases around defense and intel. And when you think about climate change and you think about economic indicators of monitoring ports or food supply, those are straight, use cases that not just DoD or Intel care about. So I think the way we can help sort of bridge that gap and sort of alleviate the concerns of the conflict between the two is really start to look for areas where you can look towards a common goal and understanding what happens when there's a food supply issue or a food security issue or a supply chain problem, and how do you alleviate those things for the betterment of the country. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as a data source to make sure we're making the data available in all use cases so that we can start to really get to a point where it's widely adopted in the commercial space. I mean, I look at this much like we've done with other technology. You look at the internet, for example, that started out with the Department of Defense capability, but now it's blown up to an insane use. So I think we're in this evolutionary process very similar to that. And I think the more we get people access to the data, the more we can do with it.
No, that's great. Thank you. And Stephen, have you seen such conflicts in Canada vis-a-vis the kind of national security and the commercial interests?
Thanks, Fatima. Truthfully, not. Now, I should note, Telesat is we provide a pretty straightforward service. We provide high-speed internet connectivity. Whereas I know some of the other folks on the panel here have a much more diverse offering. And really with broadband connectivity, it's exploding, whether it's commercial, government, academic, everyone needs access to more broadband, faster broadband, more affordable broadband. So we're seeing really a very similar trajectory in both. So less of a conflict. I think where there's, to Ryan's point about where a lot of space started in the domain of defense, where it was defense needs this, they're looking at space, they have the resources, the launch capabilities, et cetera, to do this. And there's lots of capabilities and technologies that have been developed in space and now are being used for commercial applications. But from Telesat's perspective, it's everyone needs access to high-speed internet, and we're doing our darndest to provide that.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. And Brian, I know that you wanted to just discuss this idea again, this perceived conflict, if you will, between defense and commercial. So to you, would you say that obviously there's definitely space for defense in space, but what is the role of space for defense, if you would like to speak to that?
Yeah, thanks, Fatima. So maybe a quick few points on reacting to some of the great comments that were made. So one is, this is a very simplistic point of view, but it's a hypothesis I personally have, but I'm pretty sure it's accurate. You have an emerging sector like space. It is growing exponentially. The functions of space, the accessibility of space, I mean, the commercialization of space, there's just so much that is making it a growth sector. And a lot of this has happened in the last few years. And we also had a pandemic where people were stuck in their homes over the last few years. So just one hypothesis that I have that I'll put out there, because I think people listening and anybody in the space should be thinking of, no pun intended, should be thinking about how do we deal with this when you have such growth, yet a very limited ability to be able to network, connect, to be able to explore collaboration, the serendipitous sort of meetings of minds on certain projects, issues, whatever it is, for 2 years, if not longer. That creates a really, I think, significant challenge. So really quickly, I'll plug in that we're trying to help with this, and Fatima, obviously you are as well, as you're gathering some people around this conversation. But Space Canada, we're organizing our first annual conference in October to try to get the Canadian space sector together and try to provide opportunities for this type of collaboration within the industry, but also with key stakeholders. So October 17th to the 19th to those that would be interested. So that would be sort of one comment. The other comment on Patrick's comment a few minutes ago, if there are ways that we can further enhance communication formally, informally between governments and the private sector, to Patrick's point and to others that made the point, often you will be just developing the system for something that is very specific to maybe it's a commercial use, and then all of a sudden you're saying, well, is there a way for us to be able to modify this so it can be used in defense, or it's been very much focused on being a defense application. Having the conversation between the two, right, for governments to say, this is what we're trying to figure out. And Ryan, I think it was you that mentioned stuff that's happening in the UK as well. It's like, here are the problems that we're trying to solve. Here are the things that we need to be thinking about, and giving that type of nod to industry where the government needs to go with these investments and projects, I think would be really helpful, and vice versa. The private sector being able to say that we're working on this and we think we're going to be able to do X and Y, and what kind of applications could that mean for you? And the earlier we can do that in the process, the more synergy that can be created, the more productive we can be in looking for uses for both civil defense and commercial. So that would be another thing that I just put out there that we sort of gotta, I think, continuously think about and try to improve. And I think for whatever it's worth, there's lots of effort being made to the first interventions we were making, because governments around the world are seeing the importance of space, and for all the reasons and many times unfortunate reasons that space is so crucial to advancing things that are important to us all. So they are looking to the private sector, they are looking to industry to help collaborate for sure. And then I just want to reiterate something Stephen said. A National Space Council here in Canada, akin to what's happening in the UK, the US, other countries are putting in similar entities, would help, we believe, very much government coordinate its efforts within various departments, but then also make it that much easier for the private sector and industry and other stakeholders as well to collaborate with governments and others as well to advance the things that will be important for Canada's defense and important for space in general.
Yeah, no, so thank you, Brian. Absolutely, I think you did a great summary of the important collaboration that is currently required. And I think generally, when we think government and space, defense, or the departments of defense or national defense have almost overtaken the dialogue. But there are other agencies and other departments that are equally important and that equally need to be a part of the discussion. And I'll just kind of swap the questions here a bit to tie to that. For example, earlier this month, Vice President Harris announced commitments to, and I quote, inspire, prepare, and employ the space workforce. And she communicated a roadmap to support space-related STEM education and workforce. Again, this is a very American approach to tackle the issue from a centralized government agency, if you will. Of course, the Department of Commerce of the U.S. has also had a lot of activity in the last 2 years to advance the space sector in the US. So again, I know you spoke a bit about Space Canada and its role to do the same, and of course, the idea of creating a Canadian kind of space council within our government. If I could just speak to Patrick and Brian. So in addition to commercial players, what other stakeholders can aid us to go ahead and invigorate space in both our countries?
Sure, I'll start. Sure. This is a real fundamental thing, I think. When I was a kid, I grew up in the prairies, and what was space? The most you thought about was being an astronaut, right? Something like that, right? So I still think there's a bit of a fundamental gap when we come to educating, right down to the grassroots level, what that means, what it means to be a scientist, right? As opposed to a hockey player. I mean, hockey players are cool, but scientists are cool too, right? We're awesome, and so really there is fundamental, and that trickles all the way through government down to municipalities, things like that, and really to let people know what that ecosystem is really like in space. It's not just the scientists, engineers, programmers. It comes down to machinists, assemblers, fabricators. All of those people all have a part in our ecosystem. So we should be making sure that all the organizations focus on the broadest aspects of space to make sure there's a massive education going on there.
Mm-hmm.
I think fundamental for me.
Thank you. Ryan?
Fatima, maybe I'll jump. Yeah, look, I agree with what Patrick just said, so I won't add too much, but just one little tidbit. I think it's very important for us to raise awareness with Canadians, people around the globe, of the importance of space for, again, all the reasons we've already discussed and Patrick mentioned as well. And of course, that goes from governments to the public at large as well, because if the public is aware and wants space to be prioritized, then that makes it that much easier for elected officials and governments. One thing that I would also add is I remember at one point I was in a past life at the cyber security cluster in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I was meeting with one of the key stakeholders there, and one thing he mentioned was, it's so important to encourage people to get into STEM, and he said it's important as well that we encourage people with different perspectives to get into STEM, because obviously we want the workforce that is going to be advancing a sector like space to be as diverse of perspective as possible. He also mentioned, though, and I thought this always stuck with me, and I think it applies to a few things. It applies to space as well. He said, don't underestimate, though, the need for the humanities, the need for other types of education to play a role in advancing cybersecurity in his case, but I would argue in space as well, and cyber and space are obviously very intertwined. He said we need to understand the geopolitical tensions that are creating some of the cyber attacks in his case, in the argument he was making. We need to understand what cultural realities are playing a role in creating these cyber attacks, and how we go about defending them. So, and the list goes on. So I just, that point he made always stuck with me, because we obviously need more people to be studying in STEM. We need more diversity in STEM as well. But then to not sort of do that at the au dépens, as we'd say in French, of the humanities, because they're very important as well to provide context and to provide strategic points of view in space, and in that case cybersecurity as well.
Fatima, can I just jump in and add one quick thing here as well? The reason Vice President Harris made this announcement is because they see space as massively strategic. They see it as a massive opportunity, and they're investing significant resources, both financial, but also government entities, et cetera, into winning the space race. We're seeing it in France and Europe, Canada as well. And I think the driving force behind that is she's the chair of the Space Council. And not to keep coming back to it, but it's a really important point. So that's one. And then two, just to add on to what Brian said there about diversity in the space sector, you're talking to a panel of 4 white guys, and that needs to change. I know at Telesat we've created a women's STEM scholarship, and something that we're really pushing. And I think when we think about what other stakeholders can play a role in that, government has a role, the industry and private sector have a role, but also academic, from kind of when you're in elementary school all the way up through university. We should really be pushing that space is a great sector, STEM's a great sector, but we need more diverse voices within it.
No, I mean, thanks for that. Absolutely. Ryan, go ahead. I see you're unmuted yourself, please.
No, I'm in violent agreement with everything that's being said here. I think, what I really want to highlight, though, is this need to, demystify space. Space is amazing. We can do a lot of great things there, right? But it's a planetary foundation. We can all do things with it, right? And I think the need to bring different backgrounds is critical to this. I think it's critical not only to national security for Canada, same thing for the US, but I also think it's going to be what unlocks all the other use cases and all the other things we can do with this. If all of us sitting in this call right now were to have to solve all the problems, it would be very, very narrow. And I think it's critical, right, that we have a much more diverse ecosystem of folks to pull from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we're all in agreement in this panel. And just to speak to Patrick's point, I think you touched on something when you said that it's education, it's fundamental, and it's the basics. And just one of the items, believe it or not, in the American plan is a collaboration with Nickelodeon, right, to create more to create more cartoons and inspire the next generation, right? So I think that definitely speaks to that. And just to go back to both Stephen and Brian, we're definitely hearing you loud and clear and pushing for kind of a federal entity that would push for Canadian space. But current stakeholders, what current Canadian agencies do you think could help push that in the meantime?
Maybe I can start that, and then Brian,
Yeah.
you can add on. I think it's taken a step back. When we think of space, to Ryan's point, it's space exploration. It's going to the moon, going to Mars, the James Webb Telescope stuff, and it's all super, super important and really great stuff. But when you think about stakeholders, you think, okay, that's the Canadian Space Agency, and that's probably ISED or Industry Canada. But when we think about the big challenges that we're facing today, think climate change. Who has an interest in climate change around the cabinet table? They, as Brian noted, over 50% of the metrics to monitor climate change come from space. So they probably should have a strong voice about the direction the space sector is going in Canada. When we think about social inequalities, a lot of that can be helped by having access to affordable high-speed broadband connectivity. So maybe there's other folks like economic development or infrastructure that should also be around the table. So I think it's taking that step back and saying, what role does space have in solving the biggest challenges that we're facing today? And then building the stakeholders that have interest in that. I think that's the right approach to go.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I would just add the way to think about it is which departments can impact the success of the Canadian space sector, and then which departments can receive benefits from the Canadian space sector and from harnessing space. And when you do that list, it pretty much is across the board, all departments. I mean, to varying degrees, sure, but as Stephen gave some great examples as to ones that you wouldn't think are primary targets for wanting to be focused on space. So I think if you think of it from those two angles, it becomes pretty clear that it has to be a whole of government approach. And I think that's, again, we're repeating ourselves. National Space Council would help do that for sure. In the meantime, though, we should obviously talk about defense as well, given the topic and the importance that they play. And we certainly have been doing that from the top of this conversation. And I'll just say, sort of on behalf of, on my behalf, but I think on many people in the space sector, they're keen to see that the DND had created a new division to focus on space, and that's been announced, and I know they're working hard at getting fully up and running and operational, and we're supportive of it for many reasons. One being that defense plays a very important role in advancing the Canadian space sector. Space can play a pivotal role in Canada's defense efforts, but also just the message that it sends. It sends that this department very much recognizes that space is going to play a very important role for its mandate moving forward. So by creating this, they're definitely putting in more resources and a focus. One argument we would make, though, is, of course, the idea of having that type of division is going to be helpful on a few levels for sure, but we should have dedicated people across government in different departments for the reasons we just mentioned, doing the same thing, and then connecting through a type of National Space Council to be able to coordinate the efforts and collaborate amongst the departments in advancing the sector.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks, Brian. No, absolutely. I think the announcement by DND is definitely more than welcome and anticipated for sure. So another agency that I'm always thinking about, of course, is the CRTC, or the equivalent of the FCC, right, in the US. And of course, the FCC earlier this month also came out and said, we are considering security. Of course, not only are we regulating telecom and of course broadband, but security of space assets, and of course the challenge of orbital debris is also significant. So the FCC, of course, came up with this guideline to reduce the amount companies have to bring back, let's say, their satellites after their commission from 25 years to 5 years. So it's dubbed the 5-year rule. Again, it's just a guideline, and I think the process has definitely been in conversation and negotiations. But I'm keen to hear what Ryan and, of course, everyone has to say about such regulations, and how your organizations anticipate these changes, and do you agree with them?
100%. 100% we would agree with it. We have to be good stewards with space. Low Earth orbit, it can get very it's an interesting place to have to work. We spend a lot of time navigating around space debris, and I think we have to make sure we're responsible for the assets that we put in space, and then also make sure we understand the life cycle of our instruments, and then make sure we're doing what we need to leave no trace, right? And I think that's a big piece of what we consider a part of our mission as Satellogic. We certainly want to be able to provide planetary scale data, but we don't want to do it in a way that damages the planet, right? So what we need to make sure we're doing is not only as we design our satellites for the best quality data, but also be thinking about how do we decommission this, and what does it take to make sure that that we aren't impacting negatively the environment. So, for us, our satellites have a life cycle of roughly 3 to 5 years. And we build all of our satellites, we design all of our own satellites, which means we get the ability to improve technology, improve resolution, improve everything about what we're doing. But part of that design absolutely is what happens when we're done using that satellite. And so you have to have the ability to, when it's run out of fuel, bring that in, let it burn up to a point where you're not at risk of hurting anybody on Earth, but that the satellite has basically done what it's supposed to do, and then you can move on to the next best thing that you've designed and put to space. So we're completely behind it. We're happy to see that it's there. I think it's a step towards making sure that we can continue to further what's possible out of space, and so we're very much in favor of it.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. No, that's definitely insightful. Stephen, how about what is your Canadian perspective?
Couldn't agree more. I think Ryan's 100% right. It's a massive responsibility when you put something in orbit. When you put something in orbit, it's the repercussions aren't just immediate; they're long term, and they can last for a very long time. So I know at Telesat, we've big endorser of the 5-year rule. We had planned that for our own satellites before this had come out, and this is where we've been doing this for 50 years, for over 50 years. So when we start designing a satellite, this is core to what our specs are. Has to be able to come back to Earth in a safe, environmentally sustainable way. It can't interfere with things like telescopes and light pollution, etc. And then we've also gone a step further and done things like our satellites are going to have a grappling hook on them, so that if they don't work, then we can go get them. And we're looking at different technologies like that. But yeah, it's a massive responsibility. And as the cost of launch decreases dramatically year over year, more and more folks are looking to launch more and more stuff into orbit. And I think this is where government has a really, really important role to work with industry and make sure that it's being done in a safe, sustainable way.
No, that's absolutely great to hear. I think both your organizations, one is already a time frame of 3 to 5 years, and then the other is obviously pro this kind of redubbed rule, if you will, to 5 years as opposed to 25. So I think my question now would be: are there any regulatory changes that you would like to see that you're more kind of have more insight into, or more foresight, if you will, that would be of benefit to the space sector for everyone?
I'm happy to take that one. I think I'll kind of echo what I just said. Right now, space is inherently global. It's not just, one country can't regulate all of it. We need folks to work together, and countries and regulators to work together. There are a lot of people launching a lot of stuff right now, and we need to make sure that it's being done in a responsible way, so that it's protected for years to come. So I think, if anywhere, I think that's where government has a role to play in the regulatory space of just making sure things are being done the right way.
Yeah, I think I'll echo that. And Brian had mentioned this a couple of times, around the pandemic and some of the impact that it's had on the industry. And I think we need to get back to really establishing genuine relationships across the industry, across government, across industry. And I think the more we can push people together to solve some of these problems, we can really combine and make sure that the population can benefit. And I actually, what we really want to see happen, I think all of us do, is we want to help bring this capability, bring these technologies to the commercial market. It doesn't need to just sit in DoD and Intel. It doesn't already, but let's foster it. Let's move it quicker. And I think in order to do that, we really have to make sure we have these very strong relationships across a wide group of folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. Patrick, I know you wanted to say a few words about just overall being good corporate citizens when it comes to space and Calian's role in that domain.
Sure. My issue fundamentally is, look, we're all in or we're all out. If you look at the rainforest, the rainforest and deforestation that's happened to all the tropical rainforests and the rainforests that we have around the world. The problem is that various governments, various countries are at various stages economically. What they can do to be good stewards really depends on where they sit right now and the amount of support they get from the other countries, the haves and the have-nots. Space is going to be very similar to this, or is becoming very similar to this, where the ones that can do things like put sky hooks on their satellites and just think of the other being good stewards is also contradicted by a lot of the ones that just want to get something up there to prove that they can be also playing in the space race. So it is a tough challenge globally for us to manage as a sector. And I think if we don't get ahead of this thing, then we will be up in situations where we got to roll up the windshields and batten down the hatches as we fly through the no zones up there in space. And I think it's really potentially a big issue. So encouraging, all my, I'm on the ground, so I want to help, but I just want to encourage all my customers and all the ones that fly space stuff that to be those good stewards. Yeah.
Thank you so much. No, it's definitely it's great to hear that. It's rare that you hear industry is pro-regulation. So I think this is one of the rare occasions for sure. So I want to thank you all for your time and really give you a few minutes to have any closing remarks that you would want to share with our audience. We are kind of at the top of our hour. Brian, do you want to?
Sure. Well, look, a big thank you to everybody watching and to my colleague panelists. Thank you very much, Fatima, as well, for doing a great job moderating. I guess I'll just leave with one thought. At the start of the year, the World Economic Forum came out with the top 5 risks for 2022. And in those risks, they had a version of inequality. Within that, they spoke about the digital divide. So space has a huge role to play in providing solutions for the digital divide. Another risk that they obviously mentioned was climate change. As we've already mentioned in this panel, space is going to play and needs to play an important role in fighting and mitigating climate change. Geopolitical tensions were another one that was raised in the top 5. And within that, they were talking about cybersecurity being a new way in which state actors are going to be showing aggression. Space and cyber are very much intertwined, and we need to realize that and make investments to make sure that they're protecting each other. And then last but not least, they also had space traffic, space debris as one of the top 5 risks for 2022. So I guess, and we saw with DART obviously this week that's something that's top of mind for governments as well. So with that said, I really encourage everybody listening, if you're not a space enthusiast yet and you came more for the defense slant of this conversation, space is going to be playing an important role when it comes to defense, but on so many other levels as well.
Thank you, Brian. Stephen?
Perfect. Well, listen, thank you, Fatima, and the whole Policy Insights Forum team for hosting us today. We touched on a lot of really, really great topics. And I think the one parting thought I'll just say is it's a really, really exciting time to be in space. The boundaries being pushed every day, sectors are being disrupted, some of those innovating stuff is being done. So definitely it's an exciting time, and forums like this or platforms like this are really, really great to try and get that word out. So I wanted to thank you for that, and thanks all my panelists and for those watching.
Yeah, Ryan, please.
Yeah, again, this is a lot of fun. It's always re-energizing to sit around and be inspired by how other people look at this. And sometimes you forget that we're all in this together, and we're all trying to solve hard problems. But I think there's a huge opportunity for us to take these capabilities and bring them to a mass market, right? And I think, the STEM portion of this, I think Canada sits in an amazing position to really take a leadership position in how space-based assets are leveraged for the planet. And I think that the more companies like ours can enable that, the better it is for all of us. So I'm just thankful we're a part of it. We'll play our small part, and look to find other ways that we can provide value.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Patrick?
Yeah, I'd like to echo everybody's thoughts. And first off,
Great.
thanks for letting me be on the panel and with this great set of colleagues here. And I think that it's an amazing time in space right now. I think the evolutionary cycles, the development cycles, the innovation cycles that are happening in space are happening more rapidly and more rapidly. We're getting a lot of momentum. It's really hard to keep track of what everybody's doing and what's all going on there. So yeah, it's a very exciting time. And the one thing I really want to promote here is Canada be a leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take a leadership role in space. Let's not follow. Let's be the first for something here. And I really want to see that happen in our space industry today.
Oh, thank you so much, Patrick. I don't think I could have left on a better note. Canada, let's lead for sure. So I want to thank you all genuinely on behalf of the Policy Insights Forum for your time this morning and for the little technical hiccups we've had. You could definitely tell we're a fun group. We're always down for a good laugh. And to our global virtual audience, thank you for your participation in our strategic roundtable. For more information about the Pith and our future events, please visit our website at www.policyinsights.ca. I thank you all and have yourself a great afternoon.
Thanks, Fatima.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Fatima.
Thanks.